that you are a sleep, stress, emotional intelligence specialist.
Hmm.
Um, how
And it
did
was
you?
just, I've just been just taken on a new student, and we're looking at AI and how
Wow.
leaders can use AI to increase emotional intelligence,
Okay.
Wow.
particularly as, and you will, Florian, understand this, particularly those leaders who have technical proficiency and they get elevated into leadership positions but have zero leadership experience and often don't have time
Mm.
to do, adequate leadership training, and they're thrown into these situations where they, have 100, 200 people, and it's a very different ball game, running people rather than running, say, equipment
Yeah.
or inventory or, technical capabilities. So
Yeah.
that's my new initiative.
Wow. Very interesting. And what was your like professional journey and personal journey so far?
Super accidental. So
Okay.
Okay.
serendipity. I so I was I've got three children, and so I was
Wow.
studying with three young children, and unfortunately had a marriage breakdown, and so I was thrown into, I suppose, a situation where I had to fend for myself and feed my children. And so I was studying at university, and my professor at the time, I was tutoring and just, working at the university and also studying, doing honors. And he said to me, "Oh, I would love you to become a lecturer in organizational behavior." And I said, that would be wonderful because I really need a job. And he said, there's just one small issue that we only let people lecture if they're currently conducting a PhD.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, how hard can that be?
Yeah.
I'll do it. So then I started this journey, and then I said, what should I study? And I was really interested in organizational unethical behavior.
Hmm.
Okay.
And I was researching that. And then I said, you know what? I'm actually very stressed. And
Mm.
maybe I should study stress because, I had three children, I was working and I was on my own a lot. And I thought, I think a lot of people need this and I need it myself. And so I became very interested in studying stress.
Mm.
But from a different perspective, which was usually studied, I know that when people are asked about their stress status, they often lie. They maybe conceal how stressed they are for multiple reasons, or they may confabulate or exaggerate for many reasons. And so I wanted to find an objective way of determining people's real stress status.
Wow.
And I was very interested in, well, I'd actually been doing a lot of yoga and had been reading a lot of books on
Mm.
ancient practices and philosophy and metaphysical philosophies. And I realized that within that field, there was a lot of really important information that the wisdom of our ancestors, the ancients, knew from 5,000 years.
Mm.
But I also knew in that field there was a lot of people really selling snake oil
Mm.
and who were maybe, capitalizing on people's vulnerabilities
Yeah.
to pull them in and I suppose sell them things. And so I thought it was really important to somehow bridge the metaphysics and the ancients with science.
Yeah.
And so I became very interested in emotions, and that led me into the construct of emotional intelligence. And so I thought this would be a really good PhD,
Yeah.
is to bring the science of testing hormones, cortisol, stress hormones, immune function, the science on emotions, and then how humans could, in high stress environments, bring all of these constructs together in a scientifically, peer-reviewed, evidence-based manner, and really access people who really need this, but
Mm.
may not really have access to this information if they're turned off from, the metaphysic world, or the science world is too complicated. So I thought it was a really important endeavor to bring all of the things that I'd learned over the years, my personal experience, what I'd studied, and maybe come up with some way of helping people from all walks of life
Wow.
deal with stress in high stress environments. And so I was lecturing at the University of Queensland Business School and doing my PhD and looking after my children. And
Wow.
and this is where serendipity came in. And the Australian Defence Force, well, the Army research funding, would go around to all the universities in Australia and they would fund research.
Wow.
And I, to be honest, was not really into anything to do with the military, being, at university and
Yeah.
being, my political persuasion was somewhere like not in that field. And so I, people were saying, "Oh, you should go for this funding," and I was like, "Oh, no," and I know working with defense is very hard in terms of getting ethics and it's slow and it's a big machine. And I said, "Oh," and my friends were like, "Your research is expensive. To test the cortisol is very expensive." And so, okay, I'll go. And so I went and had the interview with a guy from defense, and he was a PhD in war history,
Wow.
something I was not really interested in. And so I remember thinking there was 250 people going for this interview. And I'm like, I have no chance. Like these are people doing, really hard science and, rockets and, chemicals and, all sorts of really sort of hard science. And so I thought I really needed to have a point of difference to stand out in these 250 people going for this funding. And so I looked up the man and I read all of his white papers on the his war history. And so I went into the interview and he said, okay, it was this big kind of gruff military guy with a big, moustache. And he's like, okay, what's your name? What's your research? And I said, hi, I'm Gemma. I'm researching stress and blah, blah, blah. And then he's like very dismissive. And I said, oh, just before we start, I read your paper and I was so fascinated about this blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh. And I was like, so tell me, what did you mean when you said this? And then all of a sudden he just sort of opened up and then just spoke about himself for 40 minutes.
Yeah. Wow.
And then my supervisor was sitting next to me. She was kicking me under the table, saying, hurry up, you need to speak about your research. And then he was like, oh, the time's gone. And oh, tell me about your research. And I said, well, it's a preemptive approach to stress using emotional intelligence training. And, we use objective measures and blah, blah, blah. And he said, I love it. It's great. I've had mental health disruption myself. And then we walked out of the meeting and my supervisor was like, yes, yes, that was
Yeah.
great. And I was so excited. And she said, that's really using emotional intelligence for
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And then I didn't hear anything for like 6 months. And I was like,
Wow.
damn it, I must have just completely ruined, I should have done something better. And then I just got this email saying, congratulations, you've won the research funding. And I was totally shocked. But
Wow.
then it meant I had to actually do something and go and use, this funding in a meaningful way in an environment that knew nothing about. And so I went and I was in Brisbane and I was sent down to Sydney and to the Australian Special Forces, which is
Wow.
incredibly different environment. Very, very male dominated, no females, that high expectation, bent for excellence. These guys had IQs of over
Yeah.
140, very, very smart, very educated, very fit, very precise individuals.
Mm.
And I spent time sort of really ethnographically immersing myself into this environment
Wow.
and basically saying, okay, what can I learn from people who have obviously been in the most stressful
Yeah.
places on the planet, have been shot up, have seen their friends blown up in front of them, sleep deprived, calorifically deprived, very dangerous situations. And I thought these guys really would know about A, leadership, B, stress management, team dynamics, from the most, pointiest end. And so I sort of and often they didn't really know what they did and why they did it. They just instinctively had worked out some very effective protocols and the team dynamics, the psychological safety, the trust, the bond and the bent for excellence was very paramount. And so I got this very rare and precious insight into a world that most people never get to see from a very objective perspective. So I knew nothing, which I think the fresh eye perspective was really, I suppose, rare and important.
Yeah.
And so I would ask a million questions, and then I would sort of distill down this information and then bring all of the theoretical frameworks that I had learned over the years, throughout all my university, throughout my PhD, and sort of explain back to them why they were like that, like why this worked. And so we created this really sort of effective and very innovative new package on how to operate within a team in high stress environments, with time pressure, with your lives in peril. And we taught it back to the younger generation who were coming through selection. And we created this very effective dynamic where we called it the green hat, white coat protocol, where I would get a senior operator or commando, and they would tell stories in the language of that they understood. And they would say, you should listen to her. So kind of endorsing me and saying, you should listen to her because if I'd known this when I was in this
Yeah.
situation, I wish, things would have gone much better. So then I would come in and I would be very practical and explain the science. And it just worked very well. And we did 2 years of research. And it was essentially training them on emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Wow.
And yeah,
Amazing.
and you could imagine sitting in a room full
Yeah.
of, war-hardened, soldiers teaching them
Yeah.
about emotions. They were like, you know, why do I need to know this? And so it was a very big task, and it took a lot of mental gymnastics to understand how to, I suppose, bring this information into their brains in a way that they wanted to hear it. And so I remember thinking, and this is great advice for anyone who needs to teach people something, is like perspective take. What do they want to know from their perspective? Not what you want to teach, but like how can you couch this in terms that they hear you and they want to and they're interested in you. And so I'm thinking, how do I teach emotions? And then because I'd studied endocrinology and hormones, I knew that this was something, this was a window, this was a Trojan horse into their minds. And I said, okay, who here really wants high testosterone? And of course, they were like, yes, because it makes you faster, smarter, harder, higher pain tolerance. It just makes you buff. It makes you, controlled aggression. And so I knew that this is what they wanted. And so I said, did you know that if you don't manage your emotions, you produce cortisol, the stress hormone, and cortisol will block testosterone. And when you block testosterone, everything shrinks. And they were like, what? What do you mean everything shrinks? And I'm like, everything shrinks. And so then they were like, oh, I really need to listen to this woman. She's telling me something about something I care about. And so they were the best subjects ever. And they sat up the front, they got their notepads out and they listened to everything, asked amazing questions. And so from then I spent years teaching them. And so that was, like purely accidental that I was accepted within this environment and then became something that they actually valued.
Mm.
And when I was there was the president of the Olympic swim team
Yeah.
look, he'd gone. So when the Australian Olympic swim team went to Rio,
Oh, we lost you. Hello?
Mm. I don't know if it says of it's Gemma.
Attends. Reviens dans
I
le...
just check. It's us. Mais c'est notre raison. Hello, Gemma.
Hello.
Can you hear it?
Can you hear us?
I think I dropped out.
I think we've been disconnected.
We changed
switched
network. I don't know if it will be better. We will see.
We'll see.
You were
Okay,
saying so when the Olympic teams went to the
Rio?
Olympics in Rio.
Yeah, so the Australian Olympic team, they anticipated that we would win most of the gold medals because Australia is, amazing at swimming. And they choked under pressure. They did incredibly poorly, which was a great national humiliation. And people were very, very, very upset.
Wow.
And so the president of Swimming Australia went all around the world looking for some way to create performance under pressure protocols to make sure that the swimmers, acted in their best in that moment, but also increase the team dynamics, which wasn't so good at that time. And he saw me. He was invited to the Special Forces, and he saw me there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I was because I was the only female and only civilian. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I really love this. Can you please come and teach this to the Olympic swim team?" Now, to be honest, I knew nothing about sport either. I mean, I'd been a swimmer as a child, and like all Australians, and I'd swum competitively, but I knew nothing about sport. And so I and the head of the human performance wing from the Special Forces and I went and we consulted to the swim team. And then we consulted to a range of other different Olympic athletes through the Australian Institute of Sport. And so we just modified the language. And again, we immersed ourselves in the swimming world. We got buy-in by the coaches. And then we went around Australia and helped all of the swim team with this, performance under pressure. And then from there, McKinsey Consulting. So they became aware of my work and then asked us to go and speak at one of their leadership programs. And then I of course, knew nothing about the consulting world. And then I was then asked to go and be an advisor to them.
Wow.
And so I was then working on their programs. I would do internal work with their consultants, and then they would farm me out to their clients and work with clients. And all the whole time I was doing this, I was finishing my PhD, and then I also started lecturing, kept lecturing, and then did research while I was doing that. And then I started my consulting business, and so it's just rolled from there. And so now I have had, the immense privilege of working with huge range of people from finance, banking, law, medicine, rail, sport. I've even worked with bull riders and racing car drivers.
Wow.
And so it's essentially, anyone with stress. So at the moment now I work a lot with defense leadership. I teach on their promotion courses when the officers get promoted. I work currently designing the behavioural analysis course for the Australian security agencies. So it's a very, very broad range of work, but the unifying thread through all of this work is essentially stress, human behaviour, managing, yourself, emotional intelligence. And so I had 3 PhD students that we've gotten through, and now I've just taken on my last one, looking at emotional intelligence and AI and psychological safety. Yeah.
Wow.
That's so great.
This is so inspiring.
Yeah, definitely.
And I had a question regarding your PhD era when you were doing PhD with 3 kids. Like, how was it? Because maybe I would like to do a PhD and I would like to have kids later. So how that did it went for you? How did you manage
Yeah.
to
And also doing the consultancy work
to do
in
everything?
parallel.
What helped you at the time?
I've got traumatic amnesia. There's,
Okay.
I can't remember. So to a word of advice, it's never a good time to have children, and
Yeah.
it's never a good time to have, you know, do a PhD.
Yeah. Okay.
It's going to be hard and deeply, I suppose, exhausting, but also incredibly rewarding. Anything that really has a deep meaning and value in your
Yeah.
life, it essentially comes with pain. And that's why it's valuable. And that's why, because not many people do it. And so it was, I just feel like I probably went into survival mode
Yeah.
Yeah.
most of the time. And, I was studying stress. And so I was living it at the same time. And I was like mini experiments on myself
Mhm.
every day.
Yeah.
And and I think as a parent, you've got this enormous responsibility to everything that comes out of your mouth, every action, every behavior. They're watching you all the time. And so you really, in order to be a good parent and to pass on good advice and to be, I suppose, a good role model, you have to be incredibly mindful of
Yes.
everything you do. And of course, I did things poorly and probably wasn't, there enough. But one thing I always wanted to be was like home every afternoon, look my children in the eyes, cook them food. I was incredibly affectionate to them. I think if I can't, do all, give you money or give you a big house, at least I can give you a cuddle. So I
Yeah.
think that's the way. And my children, they still talk to me, they still love me, and they still want to hang out with me. So, and they haven't been to jail, they don't have face tattoos, they haven't, been pregnant. They've gone to uni, they've got jobs, they're sane children. So I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That you're a
That's
hero,
okay.
hero mom,
Yeah.
no, I
basically.
don't know, but yeah, I mean, it is hard, but what else are you to do? I couldn't sit back and do nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And like during your PhD and the research studies, have you done some like medical research as well, as you are talking about hormones, how the brain functions? How was it happening at the time?
Yeah, so when I first started way back, when I left school, I wanted to study medicine. Of course, I didn't get the good enough marks because I was a bit naughty at school and didn't study. And so I had to do science, and I was doing like sort of pre-med subjects and really wanted to get into medicine. So I studied medical microbiology, immunology, and what I found was that I just started reading a lot of books around psychology,
Mm.
and I started to believe that so much of people's physical health was very much correlated with their mental health. And there was a very, very strong correlation, I believed, in what you thought, what you believed, what you let run around in your mind, how you saw the world, how you talked about the world, and your physical health. Back then, that was a bit of I suppose, a novel concept in Western medicine. And I mean, the ancients have known this for a long time. And so I became very interested in psychoneuroimmunology. So, how your psychology impacts your immune system.
Mm.
And if your immune system's not working, you're very susceptible to a whole range of, physical decrements.
Yeah.
And so I became obsessed with learning about this. And so during that time, I studied immunology. I studied all, basic biology, chemistry, physiology, and or even nutrition, and became really, I suppose, I'm obsessed with,
Yeah.
how does your environment affect your health and I really saw that there was a bi-directional relationship between mental health and physical health
Mm.
Yeah.
and your relationships and your behavior and longevity. And so, but then I realized that if I was to go down the medical road, it would have been a very long, hard road, and I probably would have ended up thinking, there's better, more, I suppose, important work to be done
Mm.
in looking at psychology.
Mm.
Yes.
And so then I studied psychology, and then I realized Oh, I didn't want to actually spend my days as a clinical psychologist
Yeah.
sitting with unhealthy, mentally unwell people.
Mm,
I really wanted, instead of bringing sick people and making them normal, I really wanted to bring normal people and
Yeah.
make them amazing.
mm,
Yes.
And which is fun because you're hanging around some really high performing people doing amazing stuff. And of course they do suffer.
Yeah.
And people who are, incredibly successful in their vocations, whether that be sport or be in business, they do suffer.
yeah,
And what we see is they often have high levels of neuroticism. They have the what's the word? Imposter syndrome, and
Yeah.
often that's what drives them. That psycho. So that neuroticism is actually what makes them amazing. So
Yeah.
I was so fascinated by human behavior. And so then yeah, finished psychology and then went on to honors. And I was actually, my honors project was looking at cyberbullying and emotional intelligence and
Wow.
testing cortisol. And does emotional intelligence actually buffer the effects of cyberbullying?
Yeah.
And went into, the military PhD. So yeah, I think that, what we do in the West is we compartmentalize
Yeah.
every aspect of a human, where I then became very interested in merging these two and the field of psychophysiology, which, mind you, I got a lot of backlash because there was, particularly when I was working with the Institute of Sport, there was the physiologists hardcore there. The psychologists were over there, and you should not meet. That's your, corner, stay there. That's your lane, stay there.
yeah.
So there was a little bit of backlash around being a psychophysiologist, but
Mm,
it just made sense to me.
Yeah.
And so this is really what I've brought into my leadership practice. So now I spend a lot of time teaching leaders, CEOs, people from all different walks of life, the the concept of self-leadership. And
Hmm.
basically, in order to lead others, you must first lead yourself.
Yeah.
Because we know that, most leaders these days have sat through literally hundreds of hours of, professional and personal development, thousands and of dollars of,
Yeah.
workshops, and I've seen it firsthand that they get into a high stress environment and their brain goes blank and they forget all of those amazing 5-point plans they
Yeah.
learnt at, Harvard Business School
Yeah.
or, their Ivy League, MBA. And I thought there's a huge gap here. We're missing the necessary preconditions, the preemptive status that you must be in order to listen, to absorb information, make effective decisions, and behave in an effective leadership manner. And so I suppose this is this niche that I have sort of found within, with McKinsey and all my work there, and with my consulting is, let's look at the person and then like concentric circles.
Yeah.
Look at the
mm,
micro and then your
Yeah.
physiology, then how you think, then how you interact,
Yeah.
then how you act in a team, and then more broadly, how do you run an organization, and then more existentially, how do you operate in your environment as a human? What kind of, I suppose, what is your lasting memory? What legacy? What are
Yeah.
you going to be and
Yeah.
do?
Wow, this is so interesting.
and so, just to understand, when you will coach a CEO, or many top managers,
Perform.
or swimmers, is there like some usual practices that the people should have, or is it really individual practices
Yeah.
depending on the concentrical circles? Like, how does the people,
Which person is
yeah, behaviors?
is it like
Yeah.
yeah.
It's an excellent question. And this is, I suppose, why I've had been able to transverse across so many populations is because there are basic human behavior principles that are consistent, whether or not you're an Olympic swimmer, or whether you're a CEO, or whether you're a doctor, or whether you're a bull rider.
Mm.
The human condition is the human condition. And basically, if you think about what humans have been doing for the last 250,000 years, we were literally on the savannas of East Africa, living in clans with, a few types of threats: predation, cold, hunger, violence. We knew maximum 150 people.
Yeah.
And so our neural architecture, our stress response systems, the way we think, the way our metabolism works, everything is predicated on the environment of our ancestors. And when you look at human evolution on say, a 12-hour clock, that's like 11 hours and 40 something minutes we were like that. And modern society is the equivalent of a 4-second blip.
Mm.
We have not had enough time on the evolutionary clock to change these deep, fundamental, innate human processes to be adapted to the types of stresses that we have to deal with today. Light, sound, public humiliation on a grand scale, constant input, incredibly complex interpersonal dynamics, having interfaces with technology. We are not equipped for this at all because we're running a modern skull with ancient hardware. And so it fails us under extreme conditions. So to get back to your question, I will teach these foundational principles on, the evolutionary, beginnings of our human condition, and really just educate and get people to understand why they act the way they do in certain situations, which may seem counterintuitive. I'm about to stand up in front of the board, or I'm about to do a talk in front of 1,000 people, and my mind goes blank, my mouth goes dry, my heart is beating, and I'm sweating, and I cannot think of anything I'm supposed to say. Utterly humiliating, incredibly embarrassing. How do you teach someone that is actually a deep, ancient evolutionary process that kept your ancestors alive? And so I get people to understand it, and I get them to flip it, and I get them to notice the signs before they get to that point so they can intervene, and do something about it so they don't have this humiliating situation. Because once you do that, especially with women, they pull back, they want to go small, they don't want to step up, they don't want to take on the hard things, they will reluctantly want to do anything like that again. And so I want to teach a lot of people who are burgeoning leaders, people who are moving into this. Okay, these are the tools, these are the tricks to help you in those critical moments when your brain will fail you. And so, yes, it starts off with a lot of the same stuff, but then depending on the context, I will bring in. So, for instance, just the other week, I spent 3 days with a special emergency response team from the police. So these are like the special forces of the police. And so I would really look at system 1, system 2 thinking, situational awareness, reaction times, visualize. So because their jobs is also cognitive but physical. So if I'm in an environment like that, I will bring in a lot of research and a lot of lessons to help them. But if they're purely executives or purely in offices, that there's a whole different sort of set of problems, and I will bring in things like psychological safety and trust and decision making and human dynamics and how to make your team, the best they can be. So it is contextual, and I will often spend time kind of immersing myself in there, getting the language, getting the particular pain points that they feel, and creating scenarios and stories in ways that they can hear it. They go, that happened to me. And so that's the skill is being able to evaluate a workplace
Mm.
and then knowing, that's what's really going on. That's
Yeah.
why they're really having troubles, and then helping them with, and people love to hear stories about, Olympic athletes and special
Yeah.
forces soldiers, and I mean, so bringing in those analogies is also a way to get people's interest,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we're in a tension economy. Like getting people's attention is
Yeah.
is literally what you have to do.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so many competing priorities. There's so much input. Like, what do I listen to? And who's true? Like who knows? Who's got the honest validity to, what they're saying? And I often say, in this AI-driven landscape that we're coming into, truth doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
What will be, important in the future is, I suppose, convincing someone that your version of the truth is more
Yeah.
true
Yeah.
than
Wow.
another person's
Mm,
version of the truth. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in, because how do you know what's true anymore?
mm. And
So there's
so,
those human factors.
yeah. And so what are the basic I don't know if it's advices or behavior that a CEO or I don't know, someone who is going to do some
Hyper
conferences, yeah,
someone who will have to deal with a lot of stress
yeah,
and
at
pressure.
one certain point, what are the very basic that this kind of person should have?
Yeah, for firstly, stress is a privilege.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like you don't say, "Oh, I'm so stressed." You go, "I get to do this." Particularly if you're a female, particularly if you're a minority, and you're in a position where you're in an environment where you've got stress and you've got decisions to make, and you've got people relying on you. Like, oh my God, how amazing is that? Like, how many women throughout the history of humanity would have given anything to
Yeah.
have agency, autonomy, to be educated, to have effect over other people, to have people listen to them and want to follow them. So first of all, is change your perspective,
Perspective.
change your mindset. I get to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And then, so basically, is understanding, as I said, the processes. And so I spend a lot of time getting them to what we call engage in interoceptive ability. As leaders, as parents, as grown-ups, we are often taught to disassociate from our stress and our pain and our signals, because we just need to crack on and go through. And of course, I did that myself. But what happens in those situations for leaders is if you do that for a certain amount of time, and I think it's about 8 weeks, if you're in really high stress and you're ignoring your signals, something's going to snap. Like a circuit breaker will snap, and you'll either get sick, you
Yeah.
get bronchitis, you will get exhausted, you will have a massive fight at home, you will make a mistake. So something we know will break. And if
Mm,
you think that you can keep going, you are wrong. You may be able to for years, but I've seen it time and time again. No one gets away with
Yeah.
high stress for
mm,
long people. We are bags of chemicals, bones and blood, and we are constrained by the laws of physics. No one gets away with it.
Yeah.
mm.
And I think that's first getting, especially young leaders, you are not invincible. You are going to hit the wall at some stage. It just depends on whether you do it hard or slowly or
Yeah.
fast or circumvent it. So I will spend time getting them to reflect on what is your first instant sign of stress? What is that thing that you do when you start to feel the pressure? Is it like you're grinding your jaw? Do you lose sleep? Do you binge eat? Do you drink more? Do you doom scroll on social media more? Like and I've got this kind of bingo card,
Yeah.
and I
Mm,
go through my
Nice.
course, and I go through, then I say you've got to pick one, and I break it into physical, mental, or emotional stresses. So we know that humans have really a continuum of stress responses, where people either they're very emotional and you know it because they will express it, or people are more mentally orientated where they get scatty or procrastinate. Or we have, and this is probably most prototypical with male leaders, is we call them somaticizers. So these are people who look seemingly okay on the surface, but underneath they are essentially, stressed and they will manifest physically.
Mm.
And so I get them to notice that. And then I say, okay, once you start to feel this this feeling, you need to attend to it, and then you need to like actually look at it instead of ignoring it. Because if you keep it, it'll snowball, and before you know it, you're in, burnout situation. And so then really going through, your different types of stresses, your triggers, what triggers you, and this really goes back to values. If something doesn't trigger you unless it's coming up against one of your primary values. And so when people say, God, that really annoyed me, I'm so angry about this, and then you say, yeah, that's because this is something you care deeply about. This is something that you value. People will go, and it kind of lowers their cortisol. I talk about a lot about the biological, the physiological, the behavioral consequences of unchecked cortisol. And again, this is a Trojan horse into the brain of people who don't want to talk about weakness. I say, this is a chemical, a hormone designed to save your life,
Yeah.
and it has consequences. Physically, it makes you stop your immune system. It changes your diet, like you either like don't eat at all or you binge. It changes your gut biome. I've done research with gut biome. Gut biome is the new frontier.
What does that
It's
mean?
It's something with guts.
yeah. So inside your gut, you have between 1.5 and 2 kilograms of microbiome. So bacteria and fungus, and we know now that your gut biome very much impacts your mental health, your motivation, your sleep status, longevity. It actually affects your moods. We know that if you have, there's a lot of interventions now with your gut biome. It sounds terrible, but they're actually getting fecal implants and putting them into people with mental health disruption, and it's curing their bipolar,
Wow.
schizoaffective disorder. So there's a whole new field that's looking at how gut biome affects your behavior.
Wow.
So, a lot like you, a lot of leaders don't know this. They say, I feel depressed, I feel down, and I go, what's your gut biome like? And we actually tested, over 100 CEOs' gut biome and
I
looked
love it.
at stress, sleep, and cognitive performance,
Wow.
IQ tests. Yeah. So, yeah. So I explain a lot about that. I explain a lot around when you have high cortisol, your decision-making processes changes completely. You're more reactive. You're much more likely to go for simple explanations as to why you make decisions because you can't hold multiple different concepts at once. You become stubborn, you become less cognitively flexible, you overestimate positives of your decision, you underestimate the negatives. So your brain or your decision making 100% changes when
Mm.
you're got high cortisol. I talk about how cortisol is your stress status is highly contagious.
Yeah.
So a lot of leaders have no idea about this, and I talk about the concept of emotional contagion or through chemo signaling. So I
Wow.
like to say, if you're a leader, or just say you walk into a room and you can, cut the air with a knife, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, there's something has been going on in this room, and it makes you
Yeah.
feel like out of sorts. This is really important for leaders.
Yeah.
Your stress status is highly contagious, particularly to your subordinates.
Mm.
Your emotions contage down. And, if you want to be perceived as a highly trustworthy, highly competent, highly approachable, confident leader, if you are stressed and producing cortisol, people around you subconsciously pick that up and they perceive you differently. They don't trust you as much.
Wow.
They see, well, because obviously, if you're stressed, it means you're not coping with something.
Yeah.
So then, why would people want to follow you,
Mm.
listen to you,
Yeah.
be like you, do
Yeah.
as you say, if you haven't even got your own,
Yeah.
stress under
Yeah.
control?
And
So
does
I talk about the
sorry, sorry.
Yeah, I just talk about the importance of this is why you need to make because it's not hidden. People think I'm stressed, it's in the confines of my mind. No one knows if I just stay calm. Not true. You will get sick or something, your behavior will change, but people subconsciously they smell your stress and they pick it
Wow.
up and they
Mm.
see you differently.
Even on the distance, when, for example, via social media, like we're in a world where the digital is really present in our lives, and even in the digital space, people like we can sense stress and everything, or is it only
Yes,
like in physical spaces?
that's an excellent question. So it's much more, of course, we can't, pick up because we're picking up these micro droplets of volatile compounds. They're tiny, tiny
Wow.
droplets that we have receptors on our skin and our paranasal sinuses that pick this up, like
Amazing.
animals, right?
Yeah.
And we just get a feeling about someone.
Yeah.
Mm.
So
Wow.
and we don't really fully trust people
Yeah.
unless we've seen them in person, because we need that extra information coming from this chemo signaling. But what happens is when you're online, so you don't get all of those other modalities to make inferences about people. We don't see the full body, we don't get the chemo signaling, and there's a bit of a delay. So we hyperfixate on what we can see, which is micro expressions, slight, how people hold themselves, vocal intonation, and that it can get somewhat distorted online. And so what we see is people have a hard time trusting, and they have to use. There's some studies saying 30% more metabolic resources when you're online trying to determine,
Mm.
what is really going on in this dynamic because we don't have all those
Yeah.
other
Mm.
modalities of information. And so we don't find when we have, teams that are bilocated or we have to work with people remotely, we feel that what we see is people don't have that deep level of trust
Mm.
as they would in person. But
Wow.
also, yeah, maybe they're not picking up accurately other people's, stress status or if they're okay or if they're not, because, there's color distortions and there's, slight delays. And so, yeah, it is problematic. But I think if you are a subordinate, if you are an athlete to a coach or a child, you are very good at picking up the
Mm.
human behavior indicators of someone above you of what's their stress status, because it behoves you to know, is trouble coming my way? Am
Yeah.
I in trouble?
Yeah.
Am I protected? Am I still in the clan? Am I still part of the team? So, as a leader, how you conduct yourself in terms of stress is incredibly important. And this is something I teach people. I don't think that people really understand this. I think no one knows. And this is why I talk a lot about sleep, because again, this is another shortcut that leaders will take. They'll go, oh, I'll just take it out of my, night.
Yeah.
No one will know. But I've just did a big research project with the Harvard professor Amy Edmondson.
Yeah.
She's the woman who coined the term psychological safety. So
Wow.
we did a big study looking at leaders' stress, sleep status, and the psychological safety of their team members. And so this was a very novel piece of research, but we found that the subordinates who had a leader who was sleep deprived, in that meeting the next day, they did not trust the psychological safety was lower
Wow.
than those who were in meetings with leaders who were not sleep deprived.
Wow.
And if you ask a leader, does your sleep status affect your ability to lead? They go, no. But actually, we found, yes, it does. It has a huge
Wow.
impact that your
Wow.
team won't speak up. They don't feel like they have a voice. I mean, there's a whole lot of metrics in the psychological safety construct. But bizarrely, like these subordinates had no idea what the boss was doing the night
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
And a lot of these, to your point, a lot of these meetings were online. So that because when you're sleep deprived, you produce more cortisol.
yeah.
And so if you're in person, you can pick up the cortisol. But if you're online, there must have been some transmission of
Mm.
some behavior that the
That's crazy.
subordinates are saying, I don't know, the boss is not okay. I better not speak up today. So which
Wow.
is a huge thing.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it does give you, as a leader, if you are sleep deprived, you also have cognitive distortions. You are less empathetic. So if you had to give a performance review to a employee, if you are sleep deprived, you can think of 81% more negative attributes than positive attributes if you are sleep deprived. So
Wow.
you think, oh, I'm being fair, I'm logical, this is data and facts. Not so. It
Wow.
highly influences the way you perceive others' behaviors. So yeah, don't do a performance review with when your boss is tired.
Wow, it's
That's crazy.
mind-blowing. And
Um,
I wanted to ask you about the King strategy. I read on your LinkedIn. What's the King's strategy?
Yeah, this is a very novel and very fascinating, I suppose, strategy that I came up with. So I was, working with the special forces, and basically I said to them, "How do you guys deal with stress?" Like I saw, like head cam footage where they would jump off helicopters and run towards bullets. And I'm like, how do you get yourself to run towards a bullet? And they were like, I don't know. I'm like, what do you do? And they were like, I think we breathe. Like they use their breathing to control their stress. And I was like, that's pretty boring. I was thinking, surely there'd be some more sophisticated, interesting way. But, it kind of makes sense that when you have got nothing, when you are in like the most extreme environment, you can't have, something, you can't go and have a bubble bath. You can't go and meditate or be mindful. You have to crack on. And so Mother Nature has given us this amazing, factory of, stress reduction that's plunked right in our faces. And so I became very interested in how does breathing from a physiological perspective change your mood, your emotions, and your behavior. And so I went down this amazing rabbit hole and found that humans have inside our paranasal sinuses enzymes that produce something called nitric oxide. Have you heard of this? Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a vasodilator. It is something that will reduce your blood pressure. It opens up your airway. It sort of drops your stress. Very, very good. So if you breathe through your nose, you produce this compound. And I also found that you have receptors on your top lip that if you breathe slowly through your nose, your brain thinks, hang on a minute, you're breathing through your nose. There's no way you're getting chased by a bear right now. You're not in mortal danger. Because if you were, you'd be like this. And so what I found that if you breathe slowly through your nose, you're hacking into your primitive brain and telling your brain, I'm safe, you're fine. And what we also found in our research was that when your heart rate hits a certain beats per minute, we think around, depending how fit you are, 100 beats per minute if you're stationary, 150 to 175 beats per minute if you are active. So what happens is you've got these messages that come up your vagus nerve up into your brain, and there's this like bi-directional relationship, where there's messages going back and forth, going, what's happening out there? Your brain's saying, what should I do with this information? Sending out messages, your heart should go faster, your lungs should go faster. And then when your brain realizes that your heart and your lungs are still going at a certain rate, it sends up a message and it says, right, things are not good, you're going to need every ounce of resources to run, fight, and flee. And so your brain has this mechanism goes and clocks over. We call it like a default switch in your brain that says, you don't have time to think deeply right now because this is very metabolically expensive. Your brain uses 20 or 30% of your
Wow.
resources. And it says in this moment, you don't have the resources or the time to think deeply. I need every skerrick of glucose to go to your heart, lungs, and big muscle groups. So your brain will send information, so send energy down to those parts of your body, and you lose IQ points under stress. And
Wow.
we call this an amygdala hijack. This is when your brain flares up and you go blank. And this is what we talk about. Like this is coming. You can feel it. You can start to feel your heart going, and then your brain goes, okay, clock's over, sends energy away, and you get dumb under pressure, but you can run fast. And so what the TKS basically does, it says, look for signals that your heart rate's starting to go up. Understand where your threshold is. Know that if you don't intervene, within, we found it's around 99 seconds that your brain is going to go offline and you
Wow.
need to do something about it. And so I was looking at, okay, so what you do is you resonant breathe slowly through your nose, in and out, hit those receptors, get the nitric oxide. But what I found is that sometimes breathing is insufficient. You get so stressed that you can't do it. So we created the vagus nerve reset, is where you go.
Mm.
And what you're doing is just, yeah, try it. It's like, so the vagus nerve comes down here.
Yeah.
If you pattern interrupt that frenetic messaging going up to your brain, sending the signal saying, yeah, just give it a good
And
whacks like
where
that.
it's in the middle or?
So it can't, Vegas is the 10th cranial nerve. It comes down here and it goes down and it comes down the front of your chest here. And if you hit it like that, you can actually intervene in that message, give it a good whack.
Mm.
And what it does, it stops your brain and it shocks it. And if you resonant breathe, and then comes the third, so that's it. First, it's breathing, vagus nerve reset, and then the third part is the mental flip. And then what you do is you start to see your physiological stress responses as a resource. You
Mm.
don't see it as something that's bad. Like, normally when you start sweating and your
Yeah.
heart's up, you go, oh no, I'm stressed. I'm going to ruin this public speaking. Oh, I'm so nervous.
Yeah.
And the more you notice your nervousness, the more nervous you get. Basically, you go, no, my heart beating faster means I'm going to get more blood to my brain. I can think quicker. If I'm shaky, that's adrenaline. That's good. That's actually me increasing my speed of processing. That's my reaction time's going to increase. So you actually see whatever that stress response you're getting, you see it as a positive and as a resource and you welcome it. You go, yes, my body's doing what I need it to do in that moment. Thousands of years of evolution have brought me to this moment. This is exactly what my body needs to do. And you don't try and go, oh no, don't stress, don't stress. You go, yes.
Yeah.
So it's the breathing, the vagus nerve reset, and the mental flip. And you do this. And what we found, so we did a massive research project with the British Royal Marines, and we found that those guys who implemented the TKS, their memory was 463% better than those guys who didn't. So it was insanely successful. So now it's being rolled out throughout all of the British Royal Marines. So they're implementing it as part of their training program, which is amazing.
Wow.
Well, that's crazy.
Amazing.
But
Yeah.
it works with sport, defense, public speaking, board meetings, CEOs, conversations with your children. Anytime before you go into any situation where you start to feel stressed, you can implement the TKS and it will keep your brain online
Wow.
instead of you losing IQ points. Yeah.
And so TKS, what does it?
The King strategy.
Yeah, okay, yeah,
I did not name it
yeah, no worries.
because
That's
I was like, that sounds terrible. No, but he said, no,
it's
no,
so
we've got to
cool.
My student said you've got to call it the TKS. So
Yeah.
that's Anthony Bird from the British Royal Marines. So he's just finished his PhD. And so if anyone wants to read more about what we did and what the strategy, yeah, he's Anthony Bird,
Okay.
BIRD. Yeah.
Okay.
So his thesis is available.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I see that time flies.
Yeah.
Do you have
Until when do you have?
or do you have to go now?
I actually do have another meeting in town,
Yeah.
so I probably got another like 5 minutes, say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
sure. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what to choose. So before a competition or before a public speaking, so is there anything else that the person should do apart from the King strategy?
Yeah, so I think that so welcome, this situation, welcome that stress, but there's all these things that you can do prior to stress. And I think, I've just written a book on sleep. It's coming out in Wiley. It's called Sleep First in July. Uh, Honestly, as a stress researcher, like I didn't really care about sleep. I thought it was boring. I don't sleep that much. But then when I was looking at all the research, I was like, oh my God, like every single person that I see who
Mm,
has a sleep issue eventually succumbs to a mental health disruption. And
Mm.
mm,
every single person who has mental health disruption has a sleep disorder. And I said, I cannot ignore the fact that sleep is the foundational pillar to mental health. And many leaders and many people in organizations do not understand how important it is. They use this as a badge of honor. Oh, I've only slept 3 hours a night. It is so stupid. You
mm,
are literally drunk when you're asleep. It's the
yeah.
equivalent of being drunk.
Yeah.
And so I became incredibly interested in sleep and how do you get the most sleep when you don't have time to sleep. There's many people are jet lagged or they've got kids or big jobs. There's so much on in your life. So I became really interested in how we can create efficiency
Mm,
in sleep and what are the most important parts of sleep, and really from my research and what I've my what I've done is, if I can give you one piece of advice, have the first 2 hours before midnight protected for sleep.
mm,
Get
Okay.
up earlier.
Yes.
If you've got things to do, get up at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
But you must sleep in those first 2 hours before midnight because that's when you clean your brain with
Okay.
the lymphatic cleaning process. That's when you produce the most human growth hormone, which is the cellular repair. It's all the replenishment processes within your body. If you miss that 2 hours, you actually don't catch it up. You don't have the same metabolic
Mm.
conditions later on in the night. It's like a theatre performance. You've got to have the intro, then you've got to have the first, um, you know, what
Yeah.
do you call the first stage, second, you've got to have the intermission. And if you mess up that timing, everything falls out of place, and everything that we do is highly related to our circadian
yeah.
rhythms. So honestly, like all the leaders who I work with, who are head of huge military operations or, who run tens of thousands of people in their businesses, the ones that have been in the business for a long time and are really good, they all protect their sleep
Mm,
as if their life depends on it, because it does. And this is something consistently that I've found. They sleep first, then they religiously exercise.
mm,
Wow.
So you want to be, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You want to have longevity
yeah.
in your job. And people think, I've got no time to sleep. I've got to do this. I'm like, if you really look at who's very successful in life and has been successful for a long time, they sleep, unless of course they've got the DEC2 gene, which
Mm,
is this. Have you know this gene? These people sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. It's
Wow.
a gen, it's winning the genetic lotto.
okay.
Yeah.
People who've got this, and there's an overrepresentation of these people who've got this gene in politics. Those startups, entrepreneurs, CEOs, because I think Margaret Thatcher had
Okay.
this.
Wow.
The current Prime Minister of Japan has
Yeah.
this. So yeah, because I can read all night and
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
everything. It is a lonely thing, but
That's
Yeah, so
so,
it's a
so
really
interesting.
sleep.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so
And then
much,
everything
Jemma.
falls into place. Yeah, like if you're tired, you don't want to eat well, you don't want to
Yeah.
exercise, and you don't want to be nice to people, you don't want to think
Yeah.
deeply. So
Mm,
if once you do that, and sleep consistency. So
Yeah.
go to bed at the same time.
yeah, okay. Okay. That's crazy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jemma, for
Yeah,
your time
it
and
was
for
so great.
sharing all of
Yeah.
this valuable information with us.
Oh, thank you so much.